Hi, everybody. Really excited to be here today. This is our first interview and our first real introduction for you guys of Ronnie Yu, who we recently brought on board as our head of sustainability at Hut 8 Mining. We're actually one of the only crypto miners, publicly traded crypto miners in the world who have a dedicated head of sustainability. And so we're really excited to have him with us today and to let you guys get to know Ronnie a little bit better and answer some of the questions that you put out on our Twitter that you want to hear from Ronnie. So Ronnie, I'll hand it over to you. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, why you joined Hut 8, and then we can get into some questions.
Well, perfect. Thank you so much, Sue. Great to see you. And hello, everyone. I'm really excited to be here. As Sue mentioned, I'm the head of sustainability at Hut 8 Mining here. A little bit about myself. Born and raised in Alberta. I have 3 beautiful children, and I greatly enjoy the outdoors. I joined Hut 8 because I see there's just so much potential in this digital currency, and the drive of this management team that I've gotten to get to know in the last couple months has been extraordinary. So I'm excited to be here, Sue.
Okay, great. And why don't you tell us a little bit about your past work in the sustainability space, maybe sort of like 2 or 3 career highlights?
Sure. So prior to Hut 8, I was at Bullfrog Power, where I was heading up their PPA initiative. Successfully entered into their first long-term Alberta-based solar project with RBC. Prior to Bullfrog, I was in the US working with a renewables developer, marketing various renewable projects across various ISOs. And then prior to that, I spent nearly a decade in my career at TransAlta, where I was very fortunate to wear numerous hats, predominantly originated power and managed a vast array of variety of environmental products. We're talking voluntary RPS RECs, greenhouse gas offsets, SOx, NOx, CERS. So yeah, I've been in the space for a long time. And to be totally honest, there's been a few times where I thought I'd be pivoting and try something different, but this market continues to evolve and it continues to be exciting.
Yeah. So, in one of our conversations, you brought up something really interesting, basically how you feel that Bitcoin and digital asset mining is where renewable energy was 15 years ago, present day, that where renewables were 15 years ago. So maybe you can explain a little bit about what you mean by that and sort of how you look at the renewable spaces right now for Bitcoin versus maybe other industries. Maybe just elaborate on that a little bit.
Yeah, no, great question, Sue. I mean, when I first started Hut 8, I felt deja vu, which is really funny. I mean, 15 years ago, I was sitting in the office of Jason Edworthy with the company Vision Quest, which was a subsidiary of TransAlta. And him and I were discussing the difference between bundled and unbundled renewable energy, which is really funny because back in the day, no one knew what that meant and couldn't understand how can you deviate an electricity product where there's a REC and there's the power. Fast forward today, you've seen this commodity has grown exponentially. You see markets where you have a California cap and trade, you have voluntary RECs.
Sorry, when you say commodity, you mean energy.
Actually, I'm referring to the environmental attributes is actually deemed as a commodity as well. So you have a power commodity,
yeah,
and you have these environmental attributes, which is also a tradable commodity.
Mm-hmm.
So in the voluntary market that you see that everyone's pursuing for ESG or once upon a time called CSR, you have these RPS markets in PGM, the Northeast Connecticut, Massachusetts markets. Like I said earlier, there's cap and trade that you're seeing with a combination of offsets. You see regulatory compliance regimes. Like here in Alberta, large file emitters would have to comply with compliance grade environmental attributes. So essentially what I'm saying is 15 years ago, this is so small, no one really understand. Fast forward today, it's just ballooned. There's just so much variety. And people are there's desks, there's trade desks. You see financial institutions trading these products. You see some end users who are considering even trading these products to help with some of their requirements. So I see this digital currency, this Bitcoin, like I saw 15 years ago. I think there is just exponential growth, so much utility, so much variety that can come out of this. And, you know, we're seeing that right now.
If I'm hearing you, so many ways that that the digital asset mining and production space can actually play in some of these renewables and energy markets.
Correct.
Yeah, amazing, amazing. Yeah. So you also said something really interesting to me the other day, that you view Bitcoin mining actually as renewable and unbundled energy. What does that mean when we talk about unbundled energy exactly?
Yeah, for unbundled, so when you think of renewable energy, everyone thinks of wind farms, solar, and hydro. It's very clear you have an asset. But in reality is that when you have that one stream and you break it apart, you have a bundle is both the power and the environmental attributes together. When you unbundle the two, you have the null electricity, which is electricity, it's like water, it's just electrons flowing. Right. Then you have the environmental attributes, right? So that, to me, I kind of use it, that's completely tradable. People can, in some jurisdictions, it's serialized, and you can move around to different owners. You can use it towards compliance, you can retire, you can do whatever you want to do, right? Because there's registries out there, or you find ways to have audible transactions to show the flow of these voluntary environmental products. It's no different from Bitcoin. I mean, everything's tradable. It's digitized as an asset. It can be used across a variety of ways to use this product, right?
Use cases, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So that's really interesting. I think, what's some of the different ways that a digital asset miner can look at becoming sustainable? Because I think you and I've had some interesting conversations that, a lot of different companies are coming out with these big sort of macro commitments and looking at renewables and sustainability from a top-down approach. But you've had an interesting perspective from our conversations about there's a lot of ways to not just take a top-down, but also a bottom-up approach. So maybe you can share with our audience some of the different ways that we've been looking at becoming more sustainable, be it from, our recycling perspective, going carbon, we'll get into carbon neutrality later, but yeah, maybe talk a little bit about some of the additional bottom-up approaches that people can use.
No, great question. And, I'm of the mind that if you have the team, and when I say team, it's not just like the management, it's the whole organization, are these great individuals, our operators at our two facilities, Sedmas and Drumheller, who have the same vision, the same drive, the same accountability to get us to where we need to be. So I've had, been with the organization for, my goodness, only a couple months, having great conversation with the folks at our facilities where I said, okay, we've started down the path of waste reduction. What else can we do more of? So we look at everything from LED lighting, vehicle electrification. We look at our recycling. Can we do more audits, data? And more importantly, like recently, just we're working with a local company that helps recycle styrofoam, which is fantastic. They come in, they churn it, they make into these little bars, which we can be reused and eventually can be used towards other organizations to do somewhat of a circular economy and so forth.
Okay, so let's unpack that a bit. So styrofoam is a big waste byproduct of crypto miners, right? Because a lot of machines come wrapped and packed in styrofoam. So you're saying we would take that styrofoam and have a company effectively reduce that waste for us and then compress it? So then where does that compressed styrofoam often end up?
Yeah, no, great question. So they're working with other organizations to use this for other products. And because of COVID, they were looking at some pilot projects here, coincidentally in Calgary. So fingers crossed, there's going to be more of this kind of opportunities where they can take this styrofoam that rather go into landfills, it could be used towards other means. Now,
Yeah.
having said that, we are also pushing our suppliers, ask them, raising our hand and say, hey, hang on, we respectfully understand the current status quo is using styrofoam, but look at other ways to use other methods, other recyclable support within our boxes. So we can still reduce it on the upstream. We have a solution on the downstream. We are collecting the data, we're recording it, we're accountable for it, and we have a flow. We know exactly from point A to point B. So it's super exciting. And the great thing is this team is great. They're energized, they see it, they agree with it, they're on the ground, making sure, putting the extra time, organizing it so that we're fully utilizing the bins to capture as much as we can and divert as much as we could away from landfills. So that to me is a huge win.
Yeah, and I like what you're saying. It's not just a top-down approach, it's really a bottom-up approach to looking at sustainability. Talk to me a little bit about vehicle electrification. So maybe talk to me about how, some of the vehicles currently are at the moment, but then what that means to really move towards electrification of vehicles and how that reduces your footprint.
Yeah, no, great. So right now we have a number of UTVs, we have a number of steep steers, and we have one one-ton truck. So we basically committed to saying, look, all these vehicles, with the exception of the truck at this point, current moment, just because of the availability of an electric vehicle truck, we're looking to electrify everything else. We're going to say, you know what, we're done with these other ones. We want good quality equipment that we can rely on, but also has a very minimal impact. And we're far ahead. We're ahead of schedule. Our goal is to be 100% electrification in a couple of years once the availability of certain trucks comes to the market. But the vast majority, we're going to be electrified very shortly here.
Okay, amazing. So that's moving from equipment that would normally be powered by fossil fuels to instead electrical based equipment.
Correct. That's right.
Electrical based equipment and vehicles.
Yep. Everything's electrified. So everything's going to be charged through the electrical grid.
Okay, amazing. Interesting. Instead of using fossil fuels that are obviously emitting waste and fuel into the atmosphere. Okay,
that's right.
Cool, very cool, very cool. So if a digital asset miner, obviously in this case Hut 8, was embarking on a path to carbon neutrality, and I know that is, sort of one of the main tasks that our CEO has tasked you with, what does that path look like? So, we've talked a little bit about different ways you can take a bottom-up approach, electrification of vehicles and equipment instead of using fossil fuel-driven vehicles and equipment. But what are some of the other ways, and what does that road to carbon neutrality look like? And maybe talk to me a little bit about how does the carbon trade market work?
Sure. Nope. And it's a great question. And I always tell folks that, our path to carbon neutrality is not just the why, it's about the how. So it's easy for us to kind of say, I'm going to make a claim where there's carbon neutrality, or there's a variety of other ways, net zero, RE100, science-based targets. But for now, we're going to say, we're going to follow through with a carbon neutrality strategy, even though that strategy could change in the future as we evolve and make more material impacts and look at what we are doing, what are the options that we have, right? So being carbon neutral there's so many things to consider, or there's so many things that we are considering, rather than say we're going to buy offsets or some of that. Within our 5-year plan, we're going to be looking at renewable energy. When I say renewable energy, we're also considering things like location, like the jurisdiction, the power market. I mean, obviously everything's in Alberta, and obviously everything should stay within the province, but we still have to do our due diligence saying, well, what if you did another different jurisdiction? What does it mean in terms of like correlation? What does it mean to grid intensity factor? So this way we can say, check, we commit to doing this. Here's our main reason why, and we have a strong belief in close to our operations to have a meaningful impact. So that's one piece of the pie. Then the other piece is kind of say, well, okay, there's a variety of different kind of carbon offsets. We look at things of projects, additionality, permanence, vintage, commercial terms,
So what
All
does that
that.
mean? Unpack that a little bit. What does that mean?
Yeah, I mean, like when there's an abundance of variety, there's a lot of different types of carbon offsets out there, right? You can through different registries, you have European markets, you have Alberta-based compliance markets, all of which are created under these type of protocols. And this is where we kind of look and say, okay, different protocols have different meanings, different, for example, renewable energy can create carbon offsets in the Alberta power markets, but is used towards a lot of large farm areas as a compliance vehicle, whereas different jurisdictions is more on the voluntary market. So we kind of evaluate.
So are you saying that sort of not all carbon offset markets are created equal?
That's correct. I mean, I think there's some markets where there's higher standards, but also very expensive.
Okay.
And there's other markets that still have a material impact, but may not be as expensive. So this is where it's like, I've always told people that it's easy to do something just by signing the dotted line. You're off the races. But the due diligence, the options that we have to look at, the different lenses, and
to make sure that we have the most effective carbon offset strategy. That yep. there's an extreme due diligence process to make sure that you're doing it the right way, is what you're
yep.
saying. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Because we have to understand that we also have a fiduciary duty to our stakeholders. We can't go out and spend billions of dollars, even we would love to. It's just very difficult to do so. So we need to find that optimal mixture initially. Then over a course of a 5-year plan is, okay, what else are we going to do? What is, rather than just follow the status quo, we could increase renewable energy. We can look at carbon removal. We can look at partnerships with other organizations. There's a lot of things we can do, but for the honest, we have a plan, right? We want to be transparent about it. And we don't want to just simply say, hey, we want to just be carbon neutral.
So I like what you're saying. It's not just an empty sort of PR headline when we say we're looking at being carbon neutral. We're taking a very thorough due dil and thorough process as to the absolute best possible way for us and our shareholders to have that carbon neutrality.
That's
strategy, right? Okay, amazing. Yep. So maybe on that note, so what are the top 3 things that you look at when you're designing the optimal carbon neutrality plan? And maybe it doesn't even have to be with respect to Hut 8 mining, just what are the 3 things you look for in a plan, while you're designing it?
Well, first off, first off, you gotta make sure you have the data to support what are you gonna be offsetting, right? So we look at our scope 1 or scope 2. Scope 3 is something that we'll be looking at in the near future, just because.
So what is scope 1 and scope 2? Give an example.
So scope 1 is our direct emissions,
okay,
like the vehicles and so forth. Scope 2 is primarily our indirect emissions, which are like primarily our power consumption. And scope 3 is really the upstream and downstream of our supply chain.
Oh, amazing.
So what happens is sometimes with scope 3 is people may view it, well, I can look at a smaller lens of a scope 3, but in reality, scope 3 can be extremely large. It can go all the way to the manufacturer, to transportation, to how they do things, to all the way to the downstream to.
So you take a holistic view, really, of how much pollution an organization and how we are contributing to the pollution of that supply chain cycle. Like you actually really break it down for how much are we emitting, how much are we creating, and how much are our partners creating, if that's what I'm hearing.
For the scope 3, that is on to-do list to assess in the future, just because it's so large.
Right.
But the key thing for us, or for any start of a plan, is to let's start with what we can control, which is our scope 1 and our scope 2, but knowingly that we will eventually expand into scope 3, because you can't do everything all in 1 year.
Oh, for sure.
There's just not a time in the day.
So just to reiterate for our audience, so scope 1 is looking at how much are we emitting.
Yep,
scope 2 is how much of fossil fuels are we using, and then scope 3 is the supply chain. Correct.
That's
very
right.
Cool.
Yeah.
Very cool.
So once you figure out what our base is, and just to let everyone know, like you can also look, say, I'm going to pick a year and here's my baseline. I'm going to reduce the amount of emissions based on the baseline. Or something that we feel strongly about is we want to be honest. If we're going to be carbon neutral, we're going to look at every single year, whatever we consume, and we're going to commit to reducing or offsetting that emission for that calendar year. So we're always kept honest, right? So that's something that we're looking at. And I think it's a good, easier plan.
So you're saying we'll be setting personal KPIs and goals for ourselves.
Yeah.
Like stretch goals and KPIs for, are we actually doing what we set out and said we were going to do?
Well, KPIs, but also committing to say on an annual basis, whatever we consume, we will commit to be carbon neutral for each calendar year. So for example, if I consume a small amount in 2018, small amount in 2019, substantial amount in 2020, every single year I'm going to be carbon neutral.
Okay.
Right? Based on what our emission is for each of those calendar year. So that's us being, in my mind, rather than take a historical approach, we're just going to look at something on a go-forward basis. So that's some of the things that we're kind of considering and working through our plan. But so that's one piece of the pie, is knowing your base. Then the second piece is then you say, okay, what are my options? I mean, obviously you can get renewable energy credits. You can look at PPAs. You can look at carbon offsets.
PPAs are.
Those are power purchase agreements.
So what would that mean then? So carbon offsets and then PPAs, is that like a go forward PPA or ways to offset the current PPA? Like, what do you mean by that?
So power purchase agreement is where we will look at a new wind or solar project that's not built yet and commit to taking a percentage of the offtake of those future projects. So we can enter, let's say, I don't know, a 5-year or 10-year PPA.
Yeah.
And we would take on both the power and the environmental attributes, the length of it, into our own books. So basically we get all the environmental attributes. We're saying whatever based on the megawatt hours that we are committed to, that's the renewable energy that we are procuring. And here's the power that we're going to take on as well.
Okay, great.
So, yeah. So, I mean, the evolution has always been going from unbundled RECs to PPAs coupled with offsets and so forth. And eventually it could lead to new PPAs where there's the power and the RECs could be unbundled for a brand new project in the future. I mean, that I can kind of see that's being developed as we look at it, right? But like I said earlier, and for the honest, you have these environmental attributes, but we have to be mindful that you're also taking on a commodity risk of the power. So you also need to understand that there's a supply demand. There could be a supply demand change or shift in the future. So for example, here in Alberta power markets, we're currently seeing higher power prices, but in the future, call it 2023 forward, you could see slightly depressed power prices, mainly because of increase in solar projects that's coming online. Number of coal units will be offline, will be retired. You're going to see some of the wind REP reps, the government contracts. Like those things
what are EP reps? What are EP reps?
So our REPs. So once upon a time, or a number of years ago, the Alberta government had entered into these long-term power purchase agreements. So we're talking large projects, 500 megawatts plus. So what's happening right now there are a number of these projects that are coming online this year and next year. So as the penetration of renewables start coming online, that means the supply goes up, coupled with wherever the demand is in Alberta, and then we're going to see where the equilibrium is. But we're anticipating more supply, and that means power prices should come off. But knowingly that the wind and solar is an intermittent resource, so the generation profile is not it's not flat. It's it's variable. So those are kind of the things that organizations need to consider, the risks and understanding that there's a contract for differences, or there's a mark-to-market shift, because as power is either running or not, that would also have a impact on the economics of the project. So long story short, Sue, I know I threw a lot at you there. I mean, this is now you're making me to geek. I'm going to start geeking out here, but
geek out when in doubt.
But these are the things that we, as our organization, we have to consider. We have a fiduciary to our stakeholders to make sure that however way we proceed, have we answered the questions? Have we looked at the risks? And how do we mitigate some of those risks? And what's the optimal mixture so that we meet our sustainability goals while making sure that we do the proper due diligence.
Yeah.
It's fascinating. It's awesome. I love it.
Yeah. So from hearing you, it sounds like it is a fine dance and balance to make sure that you're being sustainable, but you're doing it right, that you've done your due diligence, you've collected your data to make sure you're doing it in the most efficient way, but also with shareholder and stakeholder value in mind.
That's right.
Okay, very cool. Well, that's it for me today in terms of questions. Really happy that you had a chance to at least start to talk to our investors. We'll definitely have you, doing more videos like this, as we continue to build out our sustainability goals and progress. Where can our investors reach you? Are you on Twitter? Where are you on social media, if at all?
Yeah. I'm on Twitter, I'm on LinkedIn, or shoot me an email. And honestly, if folks have an idea or want to look, how do we collaborate with HUD-8?
Yeah.
We should talk.
Yeah.
I mean, I love the idea of partnerships. I love the idea of how can we make a material impact and really assessing what does it mean. And I think there's just, like I said, there's so much growth opportunities right now and so much variety that's going to come down the pipe. I think it's going to be fun.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you so much, Ronnie, and we will chat with you soon.
Take care, Sue.